Very important work being done in Paris at Salpêtrière. Interestingly, one of the places that really took on John Hewlings-Jackson's ideas was where Freud was trained. It was where Charcot worked. The less said about Charcot, the better. Great man of neurology, but anyway, that's another story. The work they're doing there is showing that consciousness consists in using harmoniously separated areas of the brain. So if you look at the longest possible connection distance in your brain, it goes from your frontal pole to your temporal pole. There's an arcuate loop that connects those things. There's actually heaps of them, but that's the longest distance. When you're most conscious, those connections are firing well. And if your consciousness is fragmented, they are not. If we monitor active, functional, harmonious connections between the frontal and temporal lobe in a person with active schizophrenia, the quality of information travelling through those connections is directly correlated with the severity of their schizophrenic symptomatology. Now you want to translate that into terms of ageing. The severity of their schizophrenic symptomatology is the degree to which their world is psychotically fragmented. Doesn't conduce to any clear-cut actions, which is why we have negative symptoms in schizophrenia, ultimately extreme psychomotor retardation. And when it's working well, when those circuits are starting to work well, when the different parts of the brain are being connected up actively, associatively, and adding up to a whole that really makes a difference to the way that person responds to the world, their schizophrenic symptoms are at a minimum. They may be hearing a lot of voices, but they'll actually be functioning very, very well in the world. And in fact, some schizophrenic patients in the voices movement would say, well, our voices are one of our main helps in functioning properly in the world. They tell us what we should be doing. And you misunderstand them if you think you ought to get rid of our voices. You oughtn't. You ought to teach us how to work with them. But that's another story. This philosopher, utterly brilliant, her name is Susan Hurley. Unfortunately, she died of breast cancer in her 30s. She was working towards an integrated view, philosophical view of cognition. She had got far enough to see that we have shared circuits of cognition. Your cognition doesn't depend on what goes on in your brain only. It depends on the extent to which your brain is working in sync with the brains of other people. How do you develop that? Largely in conversation. How do you make sure it doesn't develop or declines? Deprive people of conversation. What happens in many settings? People get lonely, isolated, cut off from their family. Nobody steps in to make up the gap. They're deprived of conversation, maybe for 23 hours and 55 minutes every day. You want to improve their cognition? Give them some shared circuits to work with. Perfect example, my grandson helping me to sort out why I can't get my computer to work. Actually not true of me, but I don't have to go far among my friends to find it. This takes us completely back to some work by Heidegger. Unfortunately, had some rather nasty Nazi sympathies. Became rector of the University of Freiburg during the Nazi era, and although he wasn't explicitly associated, discovering his journals has told us some things about him that most people who like Heidegger's philosophy would rather not know. But he did know that we are creatures of flesh and word. Our flesh, what we do in the world, how we interact with the world, what we pick up from the world, is inextricably tied up with the words we use about the world, the way we talk, and who we talk to, and how much opportunity for talking there is. Notice that I've kind of hyphenated the word consciousness. This is a kind of a trick I pull on our medical students, because when you break it up, it's quite interesting. Con means with, of course. Skio means I know. Us is us. And that's what consciousness is all about. With the rest of us, I know. If that's what my life is like, then I'm truly conscious of the world. And all the time I'm astounded by other people that are more conscious of the world than I am. We come away from dinner. My wife said, "Did you notice? John and Mary are going to be breaking up soon." I say, "What? Where does all this come from?" It's consciousness. And in that area, I, like most guys, am pretty unconscious. Probably even John isn't really conscious of it. You know the wonderful story about Hillary Clinton and Bill driving into the service station, where Hillary says to Bill, "I dated the guy that's pouring our petrol at the moment." "Yeah," she said. He says, "Look what happened." He said, "Now you're married to the President of the United States, and you might have been just married to a petrol jockey." "Oh, no," she said, "but you got it wrong. If I had married him, he would have become the President of the United States." Okay. So let's just recap. As living souls, we're engaged in a world with others. Our engagement is our life. Take the engagement away, you take our life away. Just as the blade incites to violence, read gun, if you happen to be south of the border, you'll learn something. Our interaction incites to intelligence and action. Multiple dealings with things and the perspectives that grounds for us, the way we pick up the perspectives of others, build them into what we do, that's what gives significance to our moments of experience. And that's what sustains our active intellects. So the mental work of being an engaged human being who lives a story is our heart and soul. Take that away from us, what's left? Not a whole lot. Well, as Forrest Gump says, that's all I've got to say about that.
I guess what I'm wondering is what our technological environment is doing and I'm thinking particularly of the assistance we're getting. I was just saying my grandson's only 4 years old. It'll be a while before he's coaching me on the computer, and my colleague reminded me it won't be that long. But we are living in a very electronic, computerized age and use that for a lot of our interactions. And I'm really wondering whether there's been research about what that does to our cognition, our way of integrating and relating. And I'm wondering if there's been much research on it. So, and I think that applies to those of us who are care providers as well as those of us who are patients, family members. Thank you.
Yeah, Luria wrote a wonderful book called The Mind of the Mnemist. And in it, he interviewed qualitatively, as neuropsychologists tended to do at that time, a mnemonist, a person who was an expert at remembering, and asked him how he did it. And it turned out that a whole lot of techniques that the person used were verbal and oral techniques of actively using cognition to organise the material that he had to remember, in such a way as if a string of images and associations played itself out in the natural way it would in his mind, each one of those would carry along with it one of the bits that he had to remember. So our current technology is becoming a technology of instant access to the particular snippet of information we need to solve a problem. It's becoming far less encouraging and supporting of active, integrative, cognitive work. So one of the key things we have to teach our medical students, and it takes them time to learn it, is how to integrate a story that they're hearing with what they've read in their books. And until they can hold that story in their mind, be sifting actively through it for the key connections and clues to what is really going on, and also hold that intention and mutual illumination with what they've been reading in their books, they don't know how to do it. We call it clinical reasoning. It's a very active exercise of a whole range of cognitive faculties, and it takes what William James said, sustained attentive direction of the mind. In an age when you can just hit the right button on Google or type in a couple of words and get an instant answer to what you want, sustained directed attention of the mind is not something we are effectively training. So I think we are storing up wrath for ourselves, actually, in terms of significant scientific creativity and advance, because diversified thinking rather than streamlined thinking into productive paths of research is being discouraged, and sustained directed activity of the mind, which allows us not only to have diverse thinking, but also to then coalesce and integrate that into a reflective and multifaceted synthesis of a particular subject, I think is something we are going to have to very actively turn our attention to in training the next generation. And if we don't, then I'm afraid their age of future cognitive decline is going to be a whole lot more devastating than ours.
My question to you, you referred to taking a journey. When we take a journey, we have to engage all our cognitive and intellectual skills to get back to where we started. And my question is, if you're taking a journey, perhaps like a 3-month sabbatical for a fracture, and you take a journey back, do you ever really get back to the same place?
No. You know, we all know you can't step into the same river twice. What you can do, as indeed Oliver Sacks showed us when he wrote about his own fractured leg, was you can learn things on that journey that you wouldn't learn on any other. And when you reintegrate it with what you already had at the point you started, you realise that you know the place you started from in a different way than what you would have known it otherwise, which of course is one of the messages in T.S. Eliot's Little Giddings.